Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Grassley.
Yeah, I don't have an easel, so I want to show you a 50-year history of taxes and taxes coming into the federal treasury, just to show you that your wish of getting more revenue from higher tax rates just doesn't pay off. The blue line is a 50-year history of tax rates, up and down. The red line is the actual revenue that actually comes in, which tells me that the history over 50 years is that the taxpayers in this country have decided they're only going to give us in Washington so much money, averaging about 17.4% of gross national product. Now, you want to raise that about 20% to an average of about 19.9, I believe. It just isn't going to happen. People are going to decide that they're going to take leisure instead of working for the government. They've decided that this is the amount of money that's going to come in. And so taking this into consideration, how do you think you're going to fund with the tax rates you get? You're suggesting that money's going to come in, but it doesn't come in.
Senator Grassley, one, I think I need some of the visual aid that Senator Sanders talked about earlier, but from what I can see of the lines, I think not all, but partly can be explained by what I just talked to Senator Stabenow about. We need to make sure that we have an IRS, a government that is collecting what the tax law says we should be collecting. And some people absolutely do not pay what they're supposed to pay, not because they're staying home, because they have found loopholes that we are beginning to close in this budget. So, I think it is troubling, the line you've shown, and we are trying to do something about that to make sure people are paying what the tax law says they're supposed to pay. And it's usually the very wealthy who find loopholes that we need to close.
The president, on another matter, the president's budget tries to justify unprecedented levels of spending and debt by assuming interest rates will remain historically low. Recently, Secretary Yellen is quoted as saying interest rates have been, quote, too low now for a decade, unquote, and that we should welcome higher rates. But if interest rates do increase, that could be a catastrophic given escalating debt under the president's budget. As Brian Riedel of the Manhattan Institute recently highlighted in testimony before the House Financial Services Committee, interest rates that are only 1 percentage point higher than CBO currently projects would add $30 trillion of interest costs over the next 3 decades. Given Secretary Yellen recognizes the potential of higher interest rates, doesn't proposing a budget that results in public debt reaching 117% of GDP by 2031 and continues to rise thereafter risk leading us down the path that we've seen in other countries? Greece is an example. I suppose Italy would be another example towards a debt crisis.
Senator Grassley, one, I'd like to point out what we tried to do is present a reasonable budget that was honest about our assumptions. So we do actually include a rise in interest rate over time in this budget. When it was developed, it was absolutely in line with where market forecasters are. Even with that, we show a deficit savings of $2 trillion in the subsequent decade from this budget. We also see some rise in interest that are month-to-month temporary, but we also see our long-term indicators showing us it will not be a long-term issue and we remain at historically low points, which is a good thing because our real debt service payments remain low by historical standards. So we do account for rising interest, and we do still show $2 trillion in deficit savings with the budget proposals, with the offsets and tax reforms we've talked about today.
Since the end of World War II and prior to the pandemic, spending as a percent of GDP exceeded 24% of GDP in only 1 year. That was 2009 at the height of the financial crisis, when spending reached 24.4% of GDP. That was in 2009. Under the president's budget, spending as a percentage of GDP would average 24.5% for the next decade, It seems to me that if the administration is taking the concept of, quote, unquote, never letting a crisis go to waste to a whole new level, how does the administration justify permanent spending levels that once were reserved only for periods of world wars or economic crisis?
Senator Grassley, what we see, one, our proposals here are fully offset. We may not agree on the offsets, but we took the responsible route of providing offsets. We also know that the change in demographics in this country means that we spend more, but we think it's important to make sure our seniors know we have a commitment to those social safety net programs like Social Security. So you will not find cuts to those programs here. But our changing demographics have as much to do with the GDP numbers, as you've mentioned, as the proposals here. But to ensure that we don't create more of a fiscal problem down the road, we do believe these policies should be offset by reforming the tax code so it is more fair to all Americans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.